to my cell phone. It's already 10 p.m. here in Brazil. I'm talking from Paulínia in the countryside of São Paulo. So I think I will start my speech. I'm very nervous, so you forgive me anything. My English is going to be, a mess, but let's do that. Hi everyone. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are, whenever you are watching this panel, because I think it's going to be available later. I'm Jana Bianchi. I'm a Brazilian writer, translator, and editor. I have a novella and several short stories published in magazines and anthologies in Brazil. One of my stories was translated into Italian and published in Italia, and my work, written originally in English, has been published at Strange Horizons, where I have an essay about the Brazilian SFF state of play. Also at Clarksworth and Fireside, where I have fiction pieces. And I am also part of 2021 Clarion West class. And this year, I'm one of the Flights of Foundry's guests of honor. So, oh my God, I don't know exactly what to do. So first of all, I want to thank Flights of Foundry for the invitation. In 2020, watching the panels of the first edition of the event was on one of the highest points of the year for me. It was a hard year for everybody. And in 2021, I was very impressed again by the quality of the event. So I'm beyond flattered to be part of Flights of Foundry this year and in such a prestigious position. Now that things are finally starting to go back on track in Brazil, slowly, but they are. And just regarding COVID, let's not talk about politics. We don't want to go there. I feel like I'm kind of closing a cycle or ending a chapter, and of course, starting another one. It's the first time I'm a guest of honor of an event. I also never gave a keynote speech, and I had no idea of what I would be talking about until earlier this week. So I was starting to panic already, but then my therapist, without knowing anything about it, or maybe knowing, because I believe therapists work in mysterious ways, said, "May I ask you why you decided to write fiction in English in the first place?" And as usual in therapy, I started to answer, but then I realized it was not that simple. And then I said to her, "Oh, I would need, I don't know, maybe half an hour to talk about it. And maybe I should write it down before so I don't forget anything." And then, as usual in therapy, I said like, "Oh, wait, I have a speech." And here I am, about to tell you why I decided to write fiction in English. And yes, doing my therapy homework. Why not at the same time? So the first thing you need to know about this subject is that English is not my native or my primary language, as you are obviously aware of by now. I was born and raised in Brazil. I still live here in the countryside of São Paulo, as I said, and therefore I speak mainly Brazilian Portuguese. I actually learned how to speak English kind of late in life. I was 16 when I started being able to read fiction in English. I am 32 now, about to turn 33. So it means exactly half of my life without speaking a word of English, basically. When I was 21 and arrived at Denmark to study there for 9 months, I was still barely able to communicate in English to other people in real life. So it means, I don't know, like 10, 12 years of my life speaking a proper English. And it was something that kind of ashamed me at the time, because I know only 1% of Brazilians are considered fluent in English. I'm a privileged woman, and and almost all my peers at the public university where I studied at the time were part of that statistics. So I felt like I was behind. And I'm saying that, I'm starting the speech with that, because when I stopped to think about it, I concluded that it would be reason enough for me to ever consider writing fiction in English. If you write fiction in your primary language, or if you ever try to learn other languages as an adult, you probably understand me. It's like one hard thing on top of another hard thing. Like, I don't know, riding a bike with one hand tied to your back, crossing a narrow plank above a tank full of sharks while meteors fall around you. So it's a hard thing, but still, here I am. Trying to find the root cause for this insanity. I remembered a story my parents only recently told me, but the story happened in 1994, though. I was 5 years old, and Castelo rá was about to premiere. Castelo rá was a Brazilian children's program about a 300-year-old boy who lives in a magic castle in the middle of São Paulo, with his uncle and his aunt, who are, I don't know how many thousand years old sorcerers, plus several magic creatures that live in the castle. Feeling alone, Nino, which is the main character, lures three non-magical kids to the castle so they could be friends. Needless to say, I don't know if you love my pitch, but I simply loved the show. It's very hard to pinpoint our main influences as creators, but I am 100% sure that I wouldn't be the same person, let alone the same fantasy writer, if I hadn't watched Castelo rá It's easily my favorite work in audiovisual of all times. I love it. I still love it. I still think it's genius. But what my parents told me recently, just a couple of years ago, is that in our district at the time, the TVs didn't pick TV Cultura, the channel which broadcasted Castelo, and many other programs that I used to watch as a kid. For the youngsters, I don't know if there's somebody like really young listening to my speech. In 1992, there was no YouTube, there was no streaming. Internet was like just baby stepping in Brazil, at least. So basically, to watch anything, you had only the TV, regular TV, cable TV was starting to arrive in my country, in my city at least, or videotapes. So when my parents told me that the TV didn't pick the channel, I was, what? Like, are you saying the memories I have from watching Castello and all the other programs is like a Mandela effect or something? Just then, they explained to me that a couple of years before the program premiere, when I was a toddler, I had watched TV Cultura for the first time at my uncle and aunt's place. That their house was just a couple of districts away from mine, but by some, I don't know, geographical discrepancy that makes no sense, their TV could pick the channel while mine could. And I was simply mesmerized by it when I watched the programs for the first time. So my dad, who as a side hustle used to shoot weddings and edit the tapes at home, had an idea. He took two piles of tapes and would take one of them to my aunt's place every week and ask my oldest cousin to record the programs I liked the most from Monday to Friday. Then my parents would let me watch parts of the recording every day, as if I was watching the regular TV. And next week, they would take the other set of tapes and exchange them by the first set with a new week of programming recorded. So I was watching TV Cultura with a week, with a delay of a week, but I was watching the programs. I was 5 years old. A couple of months after Castelo rá premiere, the channel finally arrived at my place. We don't know why. And they don't need to do that anymore. But I won't lie, it's something that still makes me emotional when I think about it. Because in 1994, hype, the real hype of things was not a thing, at least among kids. As I said, like internet was not a thing in my city or in Brazil. So my parents didn't did it not because they thought I would be, I don't know, ostracized by my friends or anything like that. They did it just because they knew I would love the programs. I love the programs, and that I would learn from them because they were educational programs, shows, and maybe they somehow already knew I would be inspired by them. I don't know. My parents, my family in general, are very affectionate, and to this day, they do all they can to please me and my sister. But I don't know, I think there's something especially sweet in changing your routine to ensure your 5-year-old kid will get their favorite TV shows, even when they could watch anything else because they wouldn't, know they were not, they were missing something. Um, Now, as I said, I'm pretty sure Castelo rá is one of the main reasons why I love fantasy, which is one of the reasons why I started to wolf down fantasy books when I started to read by myself, which is one of the reasons why I started to write, and where it goes. So, besides the tenderness of this act, my parents' gesture ended up shaping my future, pretty much. As science fiction writers and or readers, as you probably are, you know that it's impossible to really project how one's life would be if something in their past was different. So maybe in a parallel universe in which I never met Nino, Biba, Pedro, Zequinha, and the castle, I'm now giving a passionate speech about, say, fishing or playing chess or embroidering or anything. But I like to imagine that this Jana, the writer and translator Jana, is the happiest one. So I'm very glad for that. But anyways, now cut to 2017, and bear with me, I swear it will make sense. So in 2017, after a food engineering graduation and 6 years working as a project engineer in a big company, I quit my job. I quitted my job. I liked it, but I didn't really love it. One of the main reasons for that is that I didn't really feel I was, making the world a better place. It's naive, right? But that's what I felt at the time. I was not half as politicized as I am today, but it already bugged me that the main purpose in my life at the time was to help a big company to produce expensive soap. Now I see it's a naive vision indeed, because I really believe that people working in any field to any kind of company can leave their mark in the world. But by then, I was younger and more dreamer. But it doesn't mind. The fact is that a couple of years after that, I started to choose another career I could follow, and I had discovered the amazing world of translation. So while I still worked as an engineer, I did several translation courses. And saved money so I could take a sabbatical year in an attempt to find jobs and later start to work as a full-time translation. My boss at the time told me that he was sure that I wouldn't coming back from the sabbatical year because he knew about everything. He knew I wrote and I would want to write and translate for a living. So he said, just go, you will be fine, you won't need to be back. And I wasn't. Oh, it's important, just a parenthesis. By then, in 2017, English and Spanish were a huge part of my life because I worked with an international team. So I was already skilled enough to work with translation. So English was like quickly took a biggest chunk of my life. Okay, back to the story. Being honest, the first thing that appealed to me about working with translation was the opportunity to fulfill my main childhood dream, That was to read and write fantasy and science fiction books the whole day. Because simply put, that's exactly what a translation do, what I do for a living. And I pay my bills with that. So when I started to research about like translation, the translation life, it was like, it's the perfect life. I'll be reading and writing the whole day. But also, when I stopped to think about the relevance of this potential new work to the world, my eyes really shone. Because despite Castelo rá and the amazing Brazilian content that inspired me along my whole life, and it still do, I still consume a lot of books and movies, whatever, in Portuguese and made in Brazil. Many books, movies, comic books, games, and other works that were essential to build who I am today were not originally produced in Portuguese. And therefore, as I told you, even if they were produced in English, I would never be able to consume them without people to translate all the content to the language I could understand. Needless to say, it's still a truth when I talk about anything that is written or, I don't know, produced in a language other than Brazilian Portuguese, English, and Spanish that are the only languages that I speak. So that's it, I thought. My job is going to be making content available to anyone who can't, or I don't know, who even for those who don't want to speak English or Spanish, in my case, and still for those who deserve to be able to be touched by it, maybe even inspired by it. And I think it's very beautiful. Um, it's now that I need to gather the three threads I brought to this speech. So almost 30 years ago, my parents would bend over backwards to make interesting, insightful, important content available to me, who otherwise would totally ignore its existence if they didn't draw like the tapes. And now I do the same thing for a living, bringing content in English and in Spanish to Portuguese, so Portuguese speakers who can understand those languages can read it. And finally, I write in English, so I can take my own writing, and therefore all my experiences, my culture, and my country, which I love, despite how crazy things are, abroad. And I say this, I do this not in an arrogant way, assuming the world needs to know the Brazilian culture because it's amazing or it's better than theirs or than any other. And of course, I'm also not saying that my work needs to be available to everybody. And also, I don't say that in a self-deprecating way, thinking that Brazilian literature is only valid if a non-Brazilian audience or specifically an Anglophone audience approves it. I do this out of affection, like my parents did, believing that if a single person who wouldn't be able to read my stories in Portuguese is touched or inspired by it, all the hard work will be worth it. Now, it brings me back to Flights of Foundry. It brings me back to an event that's really concerned about being diverse and inclusive, including not only, but also people from outside the US and those who don't have English as a primary language, like me, like a couple of people here in the audience that I know. And I can even start to say how important it is. I will try though. So earlier today, Diogo and I taught a workshop about writing in English as a second language. And when we were planning the content of the workshop, we decided we would focus on the main technical problems we face: grammar, vocabulary range, idioms, and so on, instead of talking about all the external factors that hamper our attempts to be part of the Anglophone community. And basically, we decided to do that because we had only 2 hours and we were afraid that we would spend at least half of our total time just complaining, about how hard it is. Because unfortunately, we need to break a lot of additional barriers if you want to be read and heard in what is considered the international fantasy and science fiction world, which is the Anglophone world mainly. I'm not talking about blatant xenophobia or intolerant and narrow-minded people. I don't really want to get any contact with those. I'm talking about very well-intentioned people, readers, but also editors, agents, publishers, other writers, and so on, who do wish to go beyond their comfort zone, but don't really know where to place us in the big scheme of things. The way people refer to what's written outside the US and a couple of other selected countries, for instance, is a good indication of how much we still need to talk about it. Often, the stories we write are seen as exotic, and I think the problem with that is already known by most of the community, so I'm not going to dwell on this topic. I will just go further and talk about how our literature is frequently seen as something new. In 2020, in the first edition of Relampeio Festival, a Brazilian SFF international event that I love, so I want to a shout out to everybody who works in Relampeio. The Argentinian writer Teresa P. Mira de Echeverria talked about this much better than I would be able to, so I will quote her. She said, and it's my own translation from Spanish to English, quote, "Often people say we have a new, fresh way of seeing the world. And I think it's not the case. It's not fresh at all. The Latin America way of seeing things is indeed a different way of seeing things. I do comment here when you compare with the Anglophone way of seeing things. But it's not new. In some places, people call our countries the new world, but we are not new. I agree we have a distinct point of view, but the America, and again, a comment by me, Jana, just remembering that America is not the US, is the whole Americas. It is not new at all. So again, I think we don't have a fresh way of seeing things. It's the other way around. We have a mature view of seeing things. We had many centuries to brew the pain, many centuries of challenges, many centuries to marvel on things, to think about how to keep going before and after getting in touch with the old world. I think all these years were kind of a pregnancy during which we gestated an idea. We gestated our way of life. So I think that what Latin America has to give to the world is not a fresh way to see things, but rather a mature, complete view. It's not naive. It's something very well developed along many centuries by many people through a lot of pain and a lot of joy. Unquote. Of course, I don't even need to say that it's true not only to Latin America. It was, she said that in a panel about Latin America literature, so this is why she specified that. But it's also true to Asia, Africa, some parts of Europe, and mainly everywhere outside the Anglophone world and a few other colonizer countries. Talking about being naive, many people are willing to read and publish stories with different point of views. They are indeed, but they keep trying to fit our narratives in an extremely narrow structure, which is assumed to be the right one, when sometimes it doesn't even make sense to entire cultures. As a result, experienced authors are seen as beginners sometimes, as if ignoring or rather purposefully subverting rules created mostly by the market was a sin by itself, no matter how entertaining or how beautiful the result is. And yes, I could spend hours talking about it. I'm not doing that. Rest in peace. But I stopped to think about it and decided to go through a different route. Because Flights of Foundry very kindly gave me this space exactly so I could be heard by the Anglophone community. But as I said, Flights of Foundry is also concerned about having a non-Anglophone audience, and I could see that in the panels I was part of in the workshop I ran. So I think that among the presents here, there are other people who, just like me, are looking for a place in the sun outside your home market, a place where what you write and what you have to say can reach a broader audience. Uh, Also, I think there are like many other Brazilians here too, so they will understand me. But I want to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to say to everybody who have English as a not as a primary language. Thus, I decided that instead of going further in what we need to change in the market, which is a very hard task anyway, no matter how willing and open-minded all the involved people are, I decided to use the last part of this speech to talk to other people from outside the Anglophone community and share a couple of things I've established as my own guidelines when navigating the wild seas. Also, I think that maybe other people from that are like me that don't speak English as a first language will be watching that afterwards. So that's for you too. Um, First of all, don't try to fit perfectly. Yes, writing is a craft, and I believe we need to be always trying to improve ours. And it depends on the language you write or the culture you belong to. And yes, any market is a matter of meeting expectations, which are already set, sometimes in stone. So everybody needs to fit at least a bit. Also, it depends on where you live. But what I would like to say is that don't give up on what is important and make total sense to you and to yours just because it seems to go against the rules, usually unspoken and not necessarily logical rules. So I think we know what rules are those. Also, don't hesitate on throwing all cultural and historical references you can in your story. Nobody is forced to know all references. Yes, that's true. But if I can read a story without knowing what the hell a Pop Tart is before Googling it, and it's a real case, or if I can read a story without knowing how warm and cozy a Thanksgiving night is, or if Mount Pleasant is a real city in South Carolina or a fictional place like Narnia, people from the US can deal with a brigadeiro or a pamonha in a story or make an effort to understand how fun it is to spend the carnival dressing up and going in matinees as a kid, and to use Google to check out if Pindamonhangaba or Araraquara is a real city or are invented cities. Both of them are real cities near my hometown. So if I can read a story and understand it without getting a full description of what the secession war was, either because I extrapolate from the context and I can understand that, or because I decide to go and read about it elsewhere while I am reading a story, people can do the same. If I mention the years of fleet as an example, that's the Brazilian dictatorship in a story of mine. Remember that the Brazilian dictatorship happened from 1964 to 1985, so just 4 years before I was born. My parents were there, my uncles and aunts were there, and many people outside Brazil don't know about it. Finally, and it's mainly a reminder to myself, and my therapist will be really proud when I show her this speech. That's my homework. I want to say, don't be embarrassed by not mastering English as if you were a native. Again, this is for myself. That there's of course a limit on how wild we can go on the appropriation of language, if that's a thing. As there's no point on writing if people can't understand us. But English is ours too. English belongs to us too. We didn't ask to be colonized. We didn't vote on which language should be the one to unite us all. If I could vote, I would vote for Portuguese. It's a very beautiful language, Brazilian Portuguese. So if there was no choice, and if you need to yield in a way to English, so we can be heard and understood by more people, by a broader audience, then let's be in control as much as we can. Let's slowly make it ours too. As I told earlier in this speech, once upon a time, I was very ashamed, embarrassed of not being able to properly speak English. I hated how I didn't pronounce certain words correctly, and still do. You could see many times during the speech. And I would die of shame if I found a typo or a funky construction in a story I had sent to a magazine and just noticed that afterwards. But now I'm always trying to improve my English, yes, but I focus on using it as a tool to express my prose instead of acing the prepositions. So I'm sorry, this is really not happening ever. To reinforce this point today, I'm not even asked my partner, who is the best English teacher in the world, and the main responsible for the huge improvement my English had in the last year or so, to proofread this speech. So you are getting it with all the wrong conjugations, all the false cognates, all the Porto English structures, and of course, all the completely wrong prepositions that my own revision didn't catch. I suppose there are many. I recount them, but I won't really apologize. I'm doing that because I like to believe that no one in the audience or in those who are watching this video afterwards, being a native or a non-native English speaker or having English as a primary language or not, will judge me as a lesser writer or as a dumber person just because of it. So, oof. That being said, I want to finish the speech by thanking a few people. I never gave a speech, as I said, but I assume that's what we do in the end. So anyways, I will thank a couple of people and I will be brief. First of all, I want to thank my family for supporting me since I was 5 to 6 years old and I started to type my first fantasy stories. For sure inspired by Castelo Rá-Tim-Bum episodes recorded in those precious tapes. I will also want to thank all my fellow non-English speaker writers who are out there facing things out. In Portuguese, we have an amazing idiom for this, which is dando a cara a tapa, which translates into offering your face so it can be slapped. And I feel like I'm really offering my face so people can slap me every day. I adventure myself in the Anglophone world. All my friends who hold my hand all the time, who read my stories, and who hear me whining about writing and publishing in any language. Thank you too. You know who you are. And of course, Flights of Foundry. Thank you a lot for inviting me to be one of your guests of honors this year. I was, as I said, like beyond flattered. That's one of the nicest things that happened to me recently. And also congratulate for the amazing event. I'm still delighted to be part of events that meant so much for me in 2020 and 2021. And last but not least, I want to thank my partner for many things, but for right now, for helping me to keep going, for making life funnier and brighter, and why not more complex, and also for helping me to be a better English speaker, a better writer, and a better woman every day. Eu amo muito você. And I think that's it. I think they said that people could type things, I don't know if questions, but could type things in the chat. So I'm here to talk to you. But if you don't have anything to say, that's it. So Sizzling saying thank you. I'm very happy to be part of Flights of Foundry. Really, I'm like really flattered. There is a meme in Brazil. I said that in my interview with Thiago, which is in the chat. That there's a meme in Brazil that says that when something very incredible happened to you and something very, you're very flattered to be in some place or in some event, you say, I don't even have the proper clothes. And this is perfectly the case. I don't even have the proper clothes to be here. So thank you a lot. I think that's it. And yes, and I think that like Flights of Foundry is close to the end. I think there's only maybe 1 hour of programming still. But again, it was amazing, and I hope to be here to be part or to watch Flights of Foundry next year. So thank you, everybody. And I see. Oh, I will just drop my handle, my Twitter handle here if you want to follow me. And yeah, thank you.